following podcast is not meant for children or for liberals, even though that's pretty much the same thing these days, but that's what we're here for. Somebody's got to keep these brats in line. Anyway, you've been warned. It's the right opinion.
These days, our media's either incompetent or malevolent. They don't believe in heaven, but they acting like they heaven sent. Knowing the truth is way harder than telling it. We gotta work harder, gotta be more intelligent. Sometimes we just gotta grab a mic and start yelling shit. We're living in times when it's hard to stay relevant. Be the elephant in the room, in a room full of elephants. Be the elephant in the room, in a room full of elephants. Boom.
Welcome back to The Right Opinion right here on therightopinion.podbean.com and iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher, and more importantly than those bigger names, it's hackerhameen.podbean.com and ratsaladreview.com, those two platforms having the temerity, the gumption, the testicular fortitude to carry this fine podcast, and we thank them for it. Check them out. At, pretty much as I said them, but nevertheless, hackerhameen.podbean.com and ratsaladreview.com. Shoutouts to Wayne Noon and the Ayatollah Bin Amin, yes. And we will be talking about a lot this week here on The Right Opinion. But before I get into all of that, let me plug some of my stuff. You can obviously check out the t-shirt store in the show notes. It's a TeePublic store. It's got about 4 logos up there, one of which is just the show logo. So if you wanted to just rep The Right Opinion, you can do that. I got a couple orders recently on my Make America Great Again shirts, which is going to be great because we are making America great again as we head into November 2020. But more importantly, as we are rolling out of this whole COVID-19 stuff, things are starting to open up. And for that matter, I'm actually getting some time to talk about other things. So we are not talking about COVID-19. This will be the last, in all likelihood, that I mention it, other than awkward situations where I'm talking about the state of the world. But I don't even think I need to get into that all that much. We're talking about heroes and we're talking about zeros. Now, obviously, we all know not all heroes wear capes. And before I get into some of my more lighthearted hero commentary here, I do want to give a more sincere props, I guess, more sincere dap to all of our heroes that are out there right now. First and foremost, obviously, the men and women of our military, and then obviously our law enforcement, our firefighters, our ambulatory workers, EMS, all that sort of stuff, and then more broadly, the medical workers, the nurses, the doctors, the people in healthcare administration, people who work at grocery stores, people who are truckers, people who are working in pet stores, people who are working, anybody that was, we'll get into it one way or another, probably somewhere down the line, but everyone who was deemed essential, went to work and kept everybody afloat. God bless you all, really, from the bottom of my heart, and hopefully on behalf of most Americans, really thank you guys for keeping it all together for us. Those are the heroes of the day, but I wanted to break down some more specific heroes because there's a lot of really cool shit going on outside of the world of COVID-19, and I'd like to dive right into it. So that's the end of COVID talk. Let's roll in to our first hero of the week, our new press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany. And yes, as we know, according to our president and just basic logic and reason, the fake news is the enemy of the people. And they are the enemy of the people. It is their job as the fourth estate, as it's often referred to keep the government in check. But what they've done over the last several years is above and beyond that. And coming off the heels of 8 years where they basically fell asleep at the wheel and still to this day, weirdly enough, proclaim that administration was scandal-free. It was scandal-free because they themselves were not reporting on things. It probably was much like the Tara Reade story. It was like, oh, well, no one knows about it, so we're not going to report on it because no one's talking about it because we're not reporting on it because no one's talking about it. Thank you, Dean Baquet, for that paradoxical logic, which will forever apply henceforth to all stupid liberal stories that just go wildly underreported or unreported in a lot of cases. We'll just assume that that's the logic because that's what they said out loud because they're fucking idiots. Anyway, so Kayleigh McEnany handing it to the fake news, look, there's a lot that could be said about Kayleigh McEnany, one of which is obviously she's a very attractive blonde, and that there's a lot of speculation as to how much that contributed to her getting this particular role. But Kayleigh ain't no slouch when it comes to cutting a promo. That much I will tell you. She's prepared. She knows exactly what the scumbag media is going to do to try to defame her. She watched it happen to Sean Spicer. She watched it happen to Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And now she's numero uno target. Stephanie Grisham escaped all this because she hasn't been doing press briefings. But I have a feeling Kayleigh's going to be doing a few press briefings. So this week, a reporter from Reuters tried to throw some comments that she made early on about the C word, and so she was prepared because, you know, let's face it, the leftist media, while they are powerful, they are not incredibly intelligent, and it's very, very, very obvious and very predictable what they're going to do at any given time. So if you're Kayleigh McEnany and you're sitting there going, I got to stand in front of a slew of leftist lunatics tomorrow, what kind of stupid shit are they going to ask me to try to get themselves in the limelight and to try to embarrass me? Well, they're obviously going to talk about these comments I made on Fox a while back that were, even in this reporter's interpretation of them, taken wildly out of context. And she puts him, and for that matter, the whole media, in their place, and then Mike drops this bitch and shuffles on out of there like a straight up G, which she most certainly is. Kayleigh McEnany, let's hear it right here on the Right Opinion podcast.
Kayleigh, in a previous life, before you were press secretary, you worked for the campaign, and you made a comment, I believe, on Fox, in which you said President Trump will not allow the coronavirus to come to this country. Given what has happened since then, obviously, would you like to take that back?
Well, first, let me note, I was asked a question on Fox Business about the president's travel restrictions. I noted what was the intent behind those travel restrictions, which is we will not see the coronavirus come here. We will not see terrorism come here, referring to an earlier set of travel restrictions. I guess I would turn the question back on the media and ask similar questions. Does Vox want to take back that they proclaim that the coronavirus would not be a deadly pandemic? Does the Washington Post want to take back that they told Americans to get a grip, the flu is bigger than the coronavirus? Does the Washington Post likewise want to take back that our brains are causing us to exaggerate the threat of the coronavirus? Does the New York Times want to take back that fear of the virus may be spreading faster than the virus itself? Does NPR want to take back that the flu was a much bigger threat than the coronavirus? And finally, once again, the Washington Post, would they like to take back that the government should not respond aggressively to the coronavirus? I'll leave you with those questions, and maybe you'll have some answers in a few days.
Yeah. Kayleigh,
thank you very much.
You were.
We can be heroes. Like, come on, man. I'm obviously being a little hyperbolic on the hero thing because they're not, this is not the level of the people that I thanked at the beginning of the show here. But like I said, when you got an enemy that is the fake news, we need crusaders. We need people to fight the enemy of the people, which is the fake news. And they, for some reason, despite the fact they know the internet exists, they know how it works, and they know that nothing is ever removed from it, they too underplayed the virus in the early goings, and they're just trying to pretend that it was just Trump, his supporters, and right-wing alternative media. That's what they've been doing for the last month, while they're talking about, the lives lost and the economy and all this sort of stuff, all problems that they've exacerbated, by the way. But the idea that these media people were fully informed, had a grand plan that was just simply ignored, is an absolute fallacy. This is the fabric of this alternate reality that they are trying to paint for you, is that Trump and the right-wingers and the conspiracy theorists and the Fox News watchers and the trailer park, flyover state people, that these people were just completely out of their minds because they thought this was just no big deal. And the media was super serious about this, was covering this, was holding people accountable, like Nancy Pelosi and de Blasio, who are inviting people out en masse in major metropolises. They weren't doing any of that. They weren't taking it any more seriously than the Fox News channel was, or that the Daily Wire was, or that the Daily Caller was, or whatever the case may be. they were just as, as lax about this as everybody else, if not worse, because at the end of the day, like I said, the Pelosi's of the world, the de Blasios of the world, these people in blue states and in super blue cities were the ones that put a lot of people in danger. Andrew Cuomo is still being worshipped despite the fact that he is personally responsible for a bulk of the deaths in the nursing homes because he put a stupid mandate in place that said we need to take these. I'm talking about the fucking virus again. Kayleigh McEnany, I'm gonna deviate. That was a hard left turn there. Kayleigh McEnany, putting these people in their place, being prepared for their bullshit, is going to do everybody a tremendous service. And the media can try to spin it all they want. Every word of what she just said was true there, and every headline she read was an actual headline that was going out at the same time that they're claiming all of the Fox News, the Trump supporters, the right-wing flyover state, country bumpkin conspiracy theorists, whatever the fuck they want to call us, the Walmart people, the smelly Walmart people, the deplorables, the irredeemables, whatever you got, baby, keep on throwing it our way. It only ensures to me that I'm doing a good job to be triggering you fucking fools as much as I do. So xenophobe, racophobe, Islamophobe, or whatever the fuck, whatever you got, bring it. Like, just bring it, to quote Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So Kayleigh putting these media folk in their place is not only awesome in this moment, but hopefully will continue to be awesome moments moving forward. These people are garbage fucking people, and Kayleigh McEnany is taking out the trash. Moving on from there, speaking of trash, Joe Biden did a virtual town hall recently, and I mean, look, you can't put lipstick on a pig, you can't polish a turd, and you cannot, under any circumstances, sell to any rational human being that Joe Biden should be in charge of the greatest country in the free world. Like, I mean, there's no conceivable measure by which you can make this man seem competent, seem relevant, seem in any way, shape, or form, even with it, nevertheless, to the point to where he should excel and hold the highest office in the land, again, of the greatest country in the history of the world. This is really terrifying. And then they take it a step further, and they have him doing a virtual town hall because, he's like, if anybody's in quarantine, it's Joe Biden. If, God forbid, this motherfucker gets coronavirus, it is a ball game for him and probably the Democratic Party from now until the end of time. But it will just completely crumble. Can you imagine the madness that would break out if Biden was unable physically and that we had to go to Bernie or a Hillary emerged or Bloomberg popped back in or whatever it was? They're lucky that convention probably isn't going to happen because I'm convinced that there would be like massive riots. Like, these people have had enough of each other's bullshit. There is such a fissure in the in the Democratic Party, and it is amazing. And Joe Biden is like the only thing holding it all together right now. Barely so. And so they have him doing this virtual town hall, I guess, whatever it is. They actually have him operating the computer at some point, which means that the people on his staff must be going into an equal, if not greater, cognitive decline than Joe Biden is to think that was a good idea. But then they've got him talking, and our hero for this segment, in addition to the absolutely god-awful internet bandwidth, whatever the fuck happened here, the connection was so bad that even Joe Biden, while he's generally incoherent, the pauses that you're about to hear and all of this audio and the skips and the lags, that is not me. That is not me manipulating it. That was pulled directly from the YouTube feed from the Biden campaign. And it is really bad. But the real hero here is the bird in the background, who's clearly had enough of Joe Biden's lies, as if you notice, it happens to be calling right after he makes some ridiculous over-the-top virtue signal statement or some blatant inaccuracy about the current situation. So, Joe, do it your best, brother. Take it away, if you even know what it is and where away may be.
This president summoned barely a word of empathy, of responsibility, of regret. There is no indication whatsoever that he understands the depth of the pain and the loss this crisis has brought. At the same time, this pandemic is exploiting the gaps of inequity that have always existed in our society. It's raining open the disparities and injustices that we've allowed to fester. It's estimated that 90% of African-American owned businesses were shut out of the first wave of relief not because relief package was racist on its face, but because of pre-existing systematic disparities in our lending system. We should be designing our economic response.
And it goes on from there. For those of you who don't speak bird, I'll just translate. Pretty much what they were saying there is, bullshit, shut up, you're old, and you're creepy. That was the general gist of as Joe was trying to convey to people through terrible internet connection, through a terrible Zoom feed, with a terrible message, and frankly, a terrible messenger. So poor old Joe, if he wasn't so, borderline evil and outright corrupt heading into all of this, I would feel very bad for him as we're watching him slowly decline, and his campaign just has no ideas as to how to push this guy as viable, because frankly it's an impossible job. But not that Joe's got memory loss clearly, but obviously he probably didn't watch that Trump interview with David Muir as Biden was bitching about how Trump has never shown even a little bit of empathy for the people who were lost in all of this. Here's a quick clip from ABC News, I believe, ABC News, and David Muir, who is a grown-ass man with a mullet. And under these given, circumstances, the C word, I can understand somebody having a situation like that. I'm not looking too well kempt these days, I guess. I don't know. But nevertheless, David Muir is hilarious. I don't know who watches David Muir besides my parents, but rest assured, I am ridiculing them when I go over to their house and I happen to see that they have this guy on. How can you take this man seriously? But he does ask a very basic question here of Trump, and Trump gives, in my opinion, a very empathetic response to this. And I think you can hear in his voice how sincere he is. So here is the president talking to the people who have lost people as a result of the C word.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you one more question about the nearly 70,000 Americans whose lives have been lost. Grandparents, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters. Right. We've lost more people now than we lost in the Vietnam War. What do you want to say to those families tonight?
I want to say I love you. I want to say that we're doing everything we can. There is nobody, I don't sleep at nights thinking about it. There is nobody that's taken it harder than me. But at the same time, I have to get this enemy defeated. And that's what we're doing, David. That's what we're doing.
There you have it. He loves you. He's thinking of you. He is losing sleep at night over you and your loss. And I mean, yeah, you can make the accusation that that's just a political, soundbite, whatever the case may be. But as somebody who's been following this guy in his political career now for 5 years or whatever it is, I can usually tell when he's full of shit and he's not. And obviously this is not by any means any sort of empirical evidence of his sincerity there. But you got to imagine, again, if you want to just apply the worst possible motives to him and that this is all about him, having 70,000 people die on his watch is not good for his legacy as a president, as a great American, and obviously he doesn't like that. So to suggest that he's like reveling in this is utterly absurd. And I think he really does feel for these families, man. We've seen more than enough stories, or at least we did early on in the presidency, before they were all completely shut down by every conceivable measure and method, for that matter. But we've heard experiences about him calling families that have died. They lost a loved one in the military, or they lost a loved one, even just for something that he was just made aware of via a story, and he reached out to people. And he doesn't need to do a lot of that stuff, but he does. And I think he's somebody who I think he likes people, like he's even the billionaire that, he would go down to the job site and go to the construction site and talk to the people who worked on the lower tier of his hotels and all that kind of stuff. He's not the snobby above it all billionaire. And frankly, I think that's precisely why he never got along with all of the snobby, above it all billionaires. And that's why they've all turned on him. And that's why he felt the need to oppose them as 2016 came around. So, props to Trump there and fucking Biden and his team. My God, it's hard to tell which one of them's more brain damage, Biden or his team. So, moving on from there, Shelley Luther. She is the Salon owner in Texas who was jailed for 1 week, or at least sentenced to jail for 1 week, for opening her shop and trying to provide haircuts and, other hair treatments to people. And, she has a little salon down there. She was getting to the point to where, money was getting tight and things were starting to loosen up. And even though she wasn't, I guess, legally told that she could open up her shop, she decided that she was going to do so. She and her employees were, coming on some real hard times here, and they needed some income. And it came down to, do we violate the order and open up and try to feed our families, or do we just, not feed our families? Obviously, when given that opportunity or given that choice, you go with the former. You got to open up. You got to take the chance. You got to try to bring some money in so you can bring some food in. And she did that. She was arrested. She was told multiple times not to do this. She shredded up, one of their, I guess, they handed her a summons of some sort, and she just ripped it up right in front of them. And good for her. For that, she is a hero. Now, here's a couple of clips from the actual court, the court hearing, I guess, that took place last week at this point, I believe. And she was basically told, as you'll hear from the judge here, that, look, we get it. Just apologize and don't open up the shop, and we're not going to make any bigger deal out of this. And the man, you know what? I've got some things to say about what the judge has to say here, so let's play that, and then I'll be right back.
You now see the error of your ways and understand that the society cannot function where one's own belief in a concept of liberty permits you to flaunt your disdain for the rulings of duly elected officials. That you owe an apology to the elected officials whom you disrespected by flagrantly ignoring and in one case defiling their orders, which you now know obviously apply to you. And that you represent to this court that you will today cease operation of your salon.
How about no, motherfucker? Seriously, what a bitch. This judge clearly is just fine with all the power grabs and the authoritarian nonsense that's been going on here, to be about the law, to be about the Constitution, to support the Constitution, which is what you're supposed to be doing as a judge, because that's what we're looking at as far as the foundation of the laws that we have here in this country. To suggest that, what did he say? Let me play it again.
The society cannot function where one's own belief in a concept of liberty permits you to flaunt your disdain for the rulings of duly elected officials.
Motherfucker, have you even read the Constitution? Have you heard of the Bill of Rights? Hashtag 1A. Our entire society is built upon the foundational belief that we are given by God the right to do precisely what he just said, and that is to flaunt our disdain for duly elected officials. There's a reason why the freedom of speech is upheld in our Constitution and cannot be infringed upon by government. It's precisely for reasons like this, when governments overstep their bounds and enact ordinances and rules and all sorts of restrictions on our basic freedoms. This woman has a right as an American citizen to try to earn a living. She owns a shop, she has a service to provide, and yes, all fucking jobs are essential, okay, government? It is not incumbent upon her as a salon owner to justify to you why her business is essential. It is incumbent upon you as the government to now explain to her why her business is non-essential and to compensate her properly. This is essentially eminent domain, right? Is that the government stepping in and saying, we need everybody to do this. We need you to close down. We need this plot of land. We're going to build this road. No, we need you to stay home to try to protect other people, because there are externalities in play, and the government does have a role in trying to protect people from one another to a certain extent, and particularly when we're looking at something on a national and global scale, they're the best suited to at least organize the efforts, not simply rule with an iron fist. The rights don't go away because all of a sudden there's a pandemic. There are no asterisks in the Bill of Rights. They are non-negotiable. And for that matter, to call back even to the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. She is not being provided with liberty. She is being taken, her life is being taken away from her, and she can't even pursue her next meal and a simply mediocre life, nevertheless a happy one. This is all against all of our foundational beliefs, all of our foundational documents, everything the founding fathers stood for and the revolutionaries fought for. This is utter absurdity. And Shelley Luther, not all heroes wear capes, not all of them cut hair either, but this one does, and God bless her for it. Here is what she had to say in response to that judge. Miss Luther, take it away.
Judge, I would like to say that I have much respect for this court and laws, and that I've never been in this position before, and it's not some place that I want to be. But I have to disagree with you, sir, when you say that I'm selfish, because feeding my kids is not selfish. I have hairstylists that are going hungry because they'd rather feed their kids. So, sir, if you think the law is more important than kids getting fed, then please go ahead with your decision, but I am not going to shut the salon.
There goes my hero. Watch her as she goes. Shelley Luther standing up to the authoritarian overreach of government and this particular judge in this instance, giving him the finger and saying, no, throw me in jail because this isn't right and I'm standing up for it. I will not apologize for trying to conduct my business, for trying to help myself and my employees feed their families. It is, again, incumbent upon the government to prove that her business is non-essential, not the other way around. And if they are going to deem her business non-essential and close her down, she needs to be properly compensated by the government. And the unemployment stuff and whatever's going on with the small businesses, she's not even able to open up the shop. So it doesn't even, it's at a point right now to where she needs money coming in. The government isn't doing what it needs to do in order to help her in that manner, and so she's taking it upon herself. Furthermore, all jobs are essential, except for the rare instance where you got like a kid who's the son of the boss, who's on the payroll, he doesn't even show up and he's collecting a salary. Other than those jobs, all jobs are essential. There are precisely 0 people out there who own businesses who are paying people to do nothing. They clearly find their business to be essential, and it is by the virtue of the fact that it is functioning and making profit. People are making money. People are acquiring their goods and services in a manner in which it is clearly essential. Otherwise, the business itself would not exist and would end up closing. Furthermore, there are no jobs out there in which a boss is paying you to do nothing. Your service, whatever it is that you provide, is essential to your boss, because if it weren't, they would not pay you to be doing it. For instance, I find a lot of the tasks that I do at my job to be rather rudimentary and rather simple. Could they be paying somebody less to do them? Probably, but whatever it is that they pay me, they've determined that it is essential that somebody is doing that particular function and that it is worth X amount of dollars in their opinion, and then I go to work and I perform that function. All jobs are essential. All businesses that are up and fully functioning and operational are essential by just the very nature of the fact that they exist and they profit and they thrive, because if they weren't essential, they would do none of those things. Good for Shelley Luther. God bless that woman. By the way, Governor Abbott and the Attorney General, I believe, down there in Texas, did speak out and say that they don't want this woman to be sentenced and put in jail. There is a process there where I guess the governor can't just wave a wand and pardon them like you see in the movies. In this case, they need to go through a parole board or something along those lines, and they need to initiate that process. But I don't believe she's being held currently. I think that's already been resolved. If not, it will be shortly in all likelihood. But they were going to jail her for a week for opening up her salon a week before she was able to legally open it up anyway. It's insane. It's criminal. And hopefully there's, in addition to her being freed, there's some disciplinary action taken against that judge and those police officers and anybody who was involved in that authoritarian nonsense. Moving on from there, let's move on to our first ever homosexual cabinet member, Director of National Intelligence, Richard Grennell. Now, it doesn't matter to us that he's homosexual, but they will, the woke scolds out there will seem to forget that the first ever LGBTQAAIP2 cabinet member was appointed by Donald J. Trump. But, homophobia or transphobia or something along those lines. So Richard Grennell, our hero this week, because he is combating yet another enemy of the people, and that enemy happens to be Little Pencil Neck Adam Schiff. People are talking about his neck, it's so small, his head is so big, and his eyes are all googly. It must be a Democrat thing. Look at that AOC, she's got those googly eyes too. Everybody's all googly, and Google's all googly. Is that why they call it Google? I don't know, but people are talking about it, and then I was hearing it, and then I came out here, and I said to people, we're talking about it, believe me. Anyway, so Richard Grennell, where was I? Oh yeah, he's combating Adam Schiff. So he says to Adam Schiff, look, Adam, you're sitting on all these transcripts from the Mueller investigation, all of these House Intelligence Committee, testimonies that are out there. There's like 57 of these things, and they've all been cleared and declassified and redacted appropriately, and they're all good to go. And so Adam Schiff, in a panic move, runs to the nearest microphone, and he's like, well, Grennell's trying to do this because obviously this is a political move. He's a very political appointee for a very political president, which is like, all of that is so insanely redundant and just shamefully biased, right? Like to suggest that anything that's being done by this presidency, or for that matter, Republicans, is being done with a political motivation, but nothing that he's ever done is done by a political motivation is outrageous and borderline just like silly. I mean, no, it's not even borderline silly. It's outright silly. It would make somebody giggle if they were even mildly aware of what's going on in the world. So he says, well, obviously these are attacks by Grennell. These redactions, we can't trust them because he's such a political actor and all this sort of stuff. And then Richard Grennell follows up and says, actually, Adam, I just took over as the DNI recently. These redactions were all done under the previous DNI. I'm just letting you know they're all good to go, and you can go ahead and release them. Oh, fuck you, Adam Schiff. Like, just unbelievable. He was sitting on these things. And why was he sitting on all these things? Well, like I said, there was 57 transcripts. Some of the big names. I mean, we got Andy McCabe was one of them, James Clapper, Ellen Farkas, Sally Yates, Don Jr., Michael Cohen, Brad Pascal, like all of these things, all of these big names, all these names that you've heard throughout the course of the Russiagate nonsense, and they were always, it always seemed like these guys were doing so. Clapper's such a hero, and McCabe's doing all these wonderful things, and he's running this investigation. Don Jr.'s so bad, and Cohen knows everything, and all of these ridiculous claims that you heard, a lot of which either came from anonymous sources or Adam Schiff. And it turns out, now that all 57 transcripts have been released, that there was absolutely no evidence in any of them that there was any collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians. None whatsoever. Mr. Clapper, James Clapper, was directly quoted as saying, no, I saw no empirical evidence that there was any conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. This is James Clapper. James Clapper was the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. That was a role that he played under the Obama administration after Michael Flynn held it for a period of time. He was let go for insubordination, a.k.a. being a fucking patriot. And here we go with Obama getting rid of him. He puts Clapper in place. Clapper is the highest ranking intelligence officer in the land. He is above even Comey's and the Brennans of the world, actually, as a result of the Patriot Act, from how I understand. I think Bongino was talking about that the other day. So they work for him. And at no point in time was Clapper asking Brennan or Comey, hey, do you actually have any evidence that any of the stuff in this dossier is true, that any of the predication upon which this investigation existed, is any of it true? Any of it? And either he didn't ask because he didn't want to know, or he did ask and was never shown anything that amounted to anything and allowed the investigation to continue inexplicably. Nope, not inexplicably, explicably, because he and the rest of them are corrupt pieces of shit. So Grennell released all those testimonies. Nothing in Don Jr.'s testimony was damning, like nothing in Brad Pascal or any of these other people was damning. All of the stuff on the other end, the Sally Yateses and the Clappers and the McCabes, all of them testified to the fact that they didn't know or see anything definitive that even suggested that Donald Trump and the Russian government were in cahoots in an attempt to steal the 2016 election for the president of the United States. None whatsoever. And this is Adam Schiff was holding on to all these things, right? He's hoarding them, much like he's hoarding, what's his name? Michael Atkinson, the ICIG's testimony from the impeachment hearing. He's still got that held up in a closet somewhere next to his, child torture chamber in his basement. Allegedly. I'm just saying. Got a CYA on that one. But he's still holding on to these transcripts. And Grennell's like, oh, by the way, buddy, you can go ahead and release those. But why was Schiff holding on to them? Now, there were some reports that Schiff was in panic mode over these transcripts, but he did ultimately release them, probably because Grennell exposed him so badly by saying, not only can you release them, but any of your potential suspicions of political motivation are null because I wasn't in place when these were cleared and redacted and declassified. So Schiff releases the transcripts. Now he's been exposed. He's been talking about all this time, for all these years, all of these different interviews that he's done on CNN, on Fox. He was even on Tucker Carlson's talking about, I've seen more than circumstantial evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians. There's a lot of, on its surface information and, all these things he said over and over again. I've seen this in evidence. I've seen it. Well, where was it? Because it wasn't in the Mueller report, because the Mueller report, like on page 2 of the Mueller report, says very clearly that we found no evidence that the Trump campaign colluded or conspired in any way with the Russian government. That's a paraphrase, as many of those have been. It's all the same language over and over again. But there's no proof. There was none. Mueller wrote like this fucking 500-page report, but none of it showed any evidence that the Trump team had actively colluded with the Russians in order to steal the 2016 election. Adam Schiff said many times he saw the evidence. Well, where was the evidence? Was there anything in any of those 57 transcripts that you were hiding from the American people for months? No. So where was it? It was nowhere. He was holding on to the fact that there was more evidence that the American public hadn't seen, and so he was running with these lies for months, and even now, up to this day, I'm sure he will still tell you that he saw evidence, but virtually all the evidence has now been released, and there is no evidence to speak of in terms of Trump-Russian collusion. So Adam Schiff just got exposed big time, and that was, due to Richard Grennell, the director of National Intelligence. Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Grennell, the Honorable Richard Grennell, for doing the right thing and for also dunking on Adam Schiff in the process. All right, last hero here, and then we're going to get into some zeros. Michael Flynn. General Michael Flynn, former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump for a cup of coffee, former Director of National Intelligence himself under the Obama administration. He was obviously acquitted. All the charges were dropped, as a matter of fact, with prejudice. They were dismissed by the DOJ. And this is wonderful. I'm going to get into some of the finer details. I'm putting together a show right now about Michael Flynn and the timeline on the Flynn case. It's going to be part of probably a multi-part Spygate series that I will ultimately do. But Michael Flynn is one of the pillars of this investigation. He was one of the big four that the government was trying to go after in order to try to get dirt on Trump and get one of these people to flip on Trump. Their big miscalculation in all of this is that there was nothing to flip on Trump about because he was not colluding with the Russians, despite the evidence that they seemingly had manufactured for them. And I will be talking about that theory when I get into the Michael Flynn special. But Michael Flynn released. This is a great day for America. This is a great day for justice. Anybody out there telling you that Bill Barr did something, super political here is just being dishonest in all of this. There are a couple things I want to debunk real quick, and then I want to thank a bunch of people for their heroism in getting Michael Flynn freed, a hero unto himself at that. So you're going to hear a lot about how he pled guilty twice. There's two big problems with that. I kind of gave you the rudimentary layperson's explanation for that last week, right? There's a myriad of examples of people that plead guilty to crimes that they didn't do. They plead to lesser charges that had nothing to do with the original charge. You plead guilty to not wearing a seatbelt as opposed to pleading guilty to going 10 over the speed limit because there's no points and the judge is cutting you a break, and so is the prosecutor or the cop involved or whatever the case may be. People do this sort of stuff all the time. There's also situations where, for frankly, it's like a forced confession, right? It's a situation where the government is leaning so heavily on just an average everyday citizen, who Michael Flynn is not an average everyday citizen, but he lives like one as far as his socioeconomic status goes. And the government laid its full weight upon him to the point to where it bankrupted him. They were also threatening his son. And there's a reason, there's a bunch of reasons why he pled guilty not once but twice to this, and that's because the government was applying about as much pressure as it could conceivably apply legally. And it may not even have been legal at that. But let's get into the legal nitty-gritty of all this sort of stuff. So 2 flaws with the he pled guilty twice theory. Number 1 is that, yes, lying to the FBI or a federal investigator is a crime, but that is not a crime in all cases all the time. There needs to be something material to the investigation, meaning that it needs to be meaningful. If they ask you what you had for breakfast on a given day and you tell them the wrong thing and they know for a fact you had pancakes when you said you had waffles, that is immaterial to the case. It has nothing to do with the substance of the investigation. It's not sending the investigators down the wrong path. Michael Flynn was supposedly lying to federal agents Peter Strzok and Joe Pianka in his interview with them on January 24, 2017. They asked him questions about a transcript that they had that they did not show him, which not violates, but is against most protocols that they would implement in such a situation where they were questioning a suspect and had a transcript of the phone call. Shadiness aside, they had the transcript. So they were interviewing him about words that they knew for a fact what they were already. They knew nothing he was going to say to them at any point during that conversation was going to change the fact that they already knew what he said to Kislyak, the ambassador from Russia. They already knew. They had an entire transcript typed up. At no point in time was what he said going to change their interpretation of what they already know that he said. And the predicate for the interview was so weak that it wasn't even able to stand on its own as its own investigation, and the federal government knew that. There happened to be a previous investigation into Michael Flynn for Russian-related nonsense prior to this that opened up in August of 2016 and was carried forward to January of 2017 and was literally about to be closed. There was a draft written up saying that in the 5 months that they had been investigating him, they had not found any derogatory evidence to suggest that he had any criminal or otherwise shady ties to the Russian government and that he was not compromised, and they were about to close the case. Then there's a big meeting in the White House that takes place on January 5th with all of the big names: Susan Rice, Sally Yates, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, James Clapper, John Brennan, and they're all sitting there, I believe Comey as well, and they're all sitting there talking about, well, what are we going to do about Michael Flynn? And they just so happened to realize that he talked to Kislyak 2 weeks before, and it was being reported in the Washington Post. They used that as an excuse, claiming that the Logan Act is enough of a reason to question him, a law that was implemented in 1799 that has never been successfully prosecuted and is probably in all likelihood unconstitutional, which is why it's never been successfully prosecuted. Very shaky ground upon which they would have never been able to open their own brand new investigation to justify. So they tacked it on to the one that was about to close. Peter Strzok called somebody in the FBI and said, hey, don't close that case yet if you haven't already. And then sure enough, they used that already open investigation to piggyback off of and then use the Logan Act, a very weak and untenable claim for which you might actually jail the incoming national security advisor, because let's face it, as the incoming national security advisor, it's not as if he's doing his own foreign policy against the will of the United States. He is going to be the incoming person working on foreign policy on behalf of the United States. So he didn't violate the Logan Act. They knew that. They went to go interview him, and they just tripped him up about things that he may have said, none of which, by the way, the things that he supposedly lied about were he talked to the Russians about a UN vote about ceasing Israeli settlements in Palestinian territory, and another thing was sanctions that were recently implemented right around Christmas of that year against Russian embassies that Obama shut down and basically deported all of their ambassadors back to Russia. They were calling Flynn to talk to him about their potential course of action to retaliate against Obama, and Flynn was doing what he could to try to temper down the situation and was not only acting in the best interest of the American people, but really in the best interest of all parties involved. An escalation from Russia would have probably caused a lot of issues that didn't need to be, as there was a new administration taking hold anyway in the not-too-distant future. And so, even if he had talked about those things, which he most certainly did, according to the testimony of the FBI agents in accordance with the transcript that they had, even if he had talked about all of those things, none of that was illegal. None of that would have violated the Logan Act, and they tripped him up on some of the minor details of the conversation in order to get him to lie, supposedly. They, even at the time, though, said that they didn't think he was being untruthful, but the greater timeline will eventually pop up down the line. But the notion, to get back to, I guess, my original point here, was to debunk the notion that he pled guilty twice. First and foremost, like I said, the lie to federal investigators, to the FBI, needs to be a material lie. It needs to be something that would have basically obstructed justice if he was telling them this, and then they did a bunch of actions after the fact that deviated them off the path of trying to find the truth. He didn't do that. Nothing he said in that interview was going to, in any way, shape, or form, change their investigation, because they already knew exactly what he said, and because they already knew exactly what he said, any idea that the Logan Act would be enough for them to open an investigation against him or even interview him in general is insane, because they literally have the words on paper, and if he violated the Logan Act, they wouldn't have needed to interview him. They would have simply been able to prosecute, because again, they already had what he said on paper written down. So it was all a trap from the get-go. The lie itself was immaterial because it didn't in any way, change the investigation or send it off course. And furthermore, and this is a real big one because this is brought up in a litany of lawsuits where there's been improper guilty pleas, is that a guilty plea, in order to be valid legally in the United States, needs to be given knowingly, voluntarily, and intelligently. Now, obviously, he is intelligent. He is very much aware of the inner workings of the intelligence community. He even told, Michael Flynn even told Andrew McCabe, when McCabe was going to send Strzok and Pianka over to interview him, he told them, yeah, I mean, you already know what I said. I assume you guys had that conversation recorded. You listened to everything that the Russians have to say. So he knew he was being recorded. Why would he have lied about these things? None of this makes any sense. So anyway, needs to be done, the guilty plea that is, knowingly, voluntarily, and intelligently. Now, obviously, he was intelligent. He was of sound mind when he made the decision. But knowingly and voluntarily, not so much. The voluntarily kind of goes out the window when you consider the fact that he was being bankrupted and ultimately bankrupted. And for that matter, the Sidney Powell regime of lawyers that took over for him and eventually got him freed was working off of crowdfunding money. Is that there was a General Flynn defense fund that was being crowdfunded, and that's the money that she was making off of. So he was already bankrupt by the time he got to the second go-around of trying to get himself exonerated here, the third go-around even. But also, so it wasn't done voluntarily from the aspect of he ran out of money and wasn't able to find himself a suitable defense to go up against the full weight of the federal government, and they were threatening to imprison his son. So he wasn't doing it voluntarily, and he wasn't doing it knowingly because the government willfully violated Brady disclosures. Now, Brady decision basically states that the government is responsible for turning over any exculpatory information if there's any information that they've gathered that suggests that the person in question did not commit the crime, even in the case of a guilty plea, that they need to bring that forward. And because it was never brought forward, and he couldn't have access to it, he couldn't have possibly known what they knew, which was that he was not guilty, but they were going to pressure him anyway until he ultimately pled guilty or turned on Trump, which, unfortunately for them and him, probably, there was nothing for him to turn on Trump about, which was the big flaw in their plan. So at the end of the day, like I said, the lie itself wasn't material.